Hello and welcome to part 19 of a video series on how to use the Blender game engine. In this video I'll be showing you how to create a text entry field in your game so a user can actually type in on the screen and they can press a button and sort of like a password field they can test to see if what they typed in is the same as a predetermined password, which can let them get to a secret screen or a further level in the game. Before I dive in though, I want to take a second to thank all of my viewers and subscribers and people who comment on my videos. You guys are amazing for all the wonderful comments and help and tips and suggestions that you've been giving in the comments below. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel or checked out my Facebook page at facebook.com/borncg, please don't forget to like and subscribe and go ahead and check that out to see more videos like this one in Blender or in tech and more upcoming videos. Go ahead and subscribe, and I thank you all for your support. Please keep on commenting in my videos and giving me suggestions for future videos. I really appreciate it. Let's go ahead and dive in. I'll click on my splash screen to get rid of it. The first thing I'll do, of course, is change my render engine from the Cycles render engine to the Blender game engine. Of course, I'll also need a logic editor window, so I'll change my timeline down here into a logic editor window. This will give us access to, of course, our sensors, our controllers, and our actuators. For this scene, I'm going to be creating a text entry field and a prompt that says password and a button that says enter, and the user will actually be able to type in on the screen and then press enter, and it'll check what they typed in against a predetermined password, and it'll take us to a different screen if that password is correct. So actually the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this default cube. I'll press X with it selected to get rid of it, and I'll press Shift A on my keyboard. The first thing I'm going to add is a text object, because of course that's what you want to have on the screen, a text object. Now by default the font that this text object uses is not a very interesting one at all. So I'm going to go over to my properties window over here with it selected. I'll have access to my font tab, and under just the regular font right here, I'll click on this open folder icon, and I'm on a Windows PC, so where I find my font folder on my computer is in the C drive. I can click on C over here, and in the Windows folder, and it's in a folder called font. You do not get a preview of the fonts that you'll be choosing, so you kind of just have to guess and check, or check in a different program to see what font you want. If you're on a Mac, I believe it's just on your Mac hard drive, and the font folder is in a folder called libraries, and you can find it in there. I believe it's just called fonts, so it's very similar to this. Let's go ahead and find a font. I'm going to find my favorite and everyone's favorite font in the world, Comic Sans, so I'll find it. Just have to go by name here. There's Comic and Comic Bold, or BD, so I'll select Comic Bold, and there we go. Now I've got Comic Sans Bold. I actually do not want this to have any text in it, so I'm going to press Tab. It has by default, of course, the word text in there, and I'm going to press with in edit mode by pressing Tab. I can now press backspace a few times to delete all of that text, and press Tab to go back into object mode. Now your text is all gone, but don't worry, you still have this little dot that you can always find in your scene, so if you select something else, it's still right there. And it's kind of hard to find, but you should be able to find it fine. Now what I can actually do here with this non-text text object selected is add a sensor to it. I'm going to be adding a keyboard sensor to it, and you don't actually have to connect anything to it, because all it's doing now is checking for any key on the keyboard. You can click on all keys instead of specifying like one key, like the K key on your keyboard. I'll just press nothing. You can click all keys, it doesn't matter. I will, but what you will need to do is create a text property that the user can actually type into to store the information that they type, the string in other words. So with this non-text text object selected, I'll click on Add Text Game Property, and it should be a string. That's just a sequence of characters or numbers in a row, like a word or a sentence. That's what we want. So now I'm going to actually enable two different properties in this keyboard sensor for this text object. The first one is called log toggle, and if I put my mouse over there, it'll describe it to me. It says property that indicates whether to log keystrokes as a string, and this is a toggle. It means on or off. That's the definition of toggle, and what this is you can actually point this property to a boolean, that means an on or off or true or false property over here, that can turn off text entry or turn on text entry depending on if it's turned true or false. So I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to create a second property. We have a text game property. I'll click on add game property to add a second one. This one is not going to be a string type. It's going to be a Boolean. Again, that means true or false. And I'm going to name it text entry, and I'll press enter. You can name this whatever you want, but text entry just makes sense to me. And if you enable it by default, if I click this little checkbox, that means this Boolean variable or property is true and you can edit text. So right now, I believe if I turn on or point this toggle property to text entry, and I set my target to the text string text special property, by clicking there and clicking on text. If I now press P to play my game, I can actually type in on my keyboard just like a user would and enter text. That's great. Let's go ahead and press escape. And as you can see, once you end your game, the text goes away. If I press P again, that same string of text is not there, but that's okay in the scope of this video. Let's go ahead and make this look a little bit better. So I'm actually going to add a white square below this, and that actually will have a purpose in our game to enable this on or off text string enabling. So I'm going to press Shift A on my keyboard. Actually, my 3D cursor is over here. I'll press Shift C to put it back in the middle. I'll press Shift A. I'm going to add a mesh plane, and I'm going to put it where I think the text is going to go. So I'll move it up there. I'll tap S and then X to scale this out on the X axis only, and then S and then Y to scale it up a little bit like that. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like. I'm going to move it down a little bit though, so it's not quite sitting in the same plane as the text itself. If I press P now and type in, of course it's way too big, so I'll S and then Y, and then maybe S and then X to make it smaller. Let's see what that looks like. I'll press P and type in. They're both about the same color. In fact, I'll move that up, but what I'll do is I'll select that text object. Now, you can't actually apply a material to a text object when it's editable text, but you can add object color. So with that text object selected, I'll go to the Object tab, and down here under Object Color, I'll just give it a greenish color. So now, if I go to my top view, actually I'm going to give this plane a white material. And because we're in the Blender game engine, we get, this is what our material options look like. It's the old Blender render engines materials, not cycles. And I'm going to actually make it shadeless, which will make it this almost white color. And I'll change the diffuse to entirely white, so now it'll be a white box with red text. If I press P now, I can type in, actually it's green text, pardon me. That's the color that I gave the text, but of course you can see what it looks like now. That looks pretty good to me. I'll just move that up just a little bit. Let's give a prompt to our user. So I'll press Shift A. I'm going to add a text object, and I'll put it over there, and I'll press Tab to go into edit mode and type in password, and I'll press Tab to go back and move it over. I'm going to go back to my font tab, and I'm going to choose the same Comic Sans bold font. Now, because this is not editable text, it's just static text, it looks like text, I'll actually make it a little bit extruded over here under the font tab. You can make text be 3D. And because it's not editable, I might as well make it into a mesh at this point so I can add a material to it. So with it selected, if you press Alt-C on your keyboard, Alt-C brings up the Convert To menu, and I want to convert to a mesh from a curve, meta, surf, or text. Okay, so now it's a mesh. I can make it have material. I'm going to have it have a kind of a red orange material. That looks pretty good to me. I don't want any specular value. And I might want some emit, maybe some 0.2 emit that'll make it not quite so shadowy. So now if I go back to kind of a top view and press P, I can type in. Now you might have multiple text fields in a screen in your game. And if that's the case, you don't want to have the user just typing in all of them at the same time. You want them to have to click in the area where they're going to type before they type. So in order for that to happen, we need a couple things to be true. We need to actually have the user be able to see their mouse in this screen. And so what I'll do is I'm going to position my camera. So I'll press 0 on my number pad to go through my camera view. And do I have lock camera to view enabled? No, I don't. So I can click on this little plus or N on my keyboard, and under view I can click on lock camera to view. So now I can orbit my camera. And this is important because on the camera object itself, I'm going to add a mouse visibility. I'm going to hide my properties down here with the edge of the camera selected. So if I right click on there, I can add logic bricks to my camera. I'm going to say always, and I'm going to say always mouse and enable mouse visible. So this needs to be dark in order for my mouse to be visible. By default, by the way, if you play your game, you cannot see your mouse cursor. So this is what we're doing here. We're enabling the user to be able to see their mouse. So if I press P now, I need to actually enable visible right there. If I press P again, I can now see my mouse cursor while I'm playing my game. What I want to have to do here is actually click on this white box in order to start typing. Right now I can type at any point. I don't want that in case there's multiple text fields. So I'm actually going to enable this white box to act like a button. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to add a few sensors here. In order for you to make a button, and by the way, I've already made a video on how to make buttons in the Blender game engine. If you have not seen that video, up in the top right corner there will be a card which looks like a little eye. If you click on that, you'll get links to my video on how to make clickable buttons, as well as a link to this entire video tutorial series on the Blender game engine. Go ahead and check that out if you're not sure how to do many of the things that you're probably already wondering about in the Blender game engine. Okay, let's go ahead and make this white box into a button, which will make it, you have to actually click on it in order to type. So I'm going to say, with this white box selected, if the mouse is over it, so I'm going to change this option to mouse over. This is just a mouse sensor. If the mouse is over this white box, and I'm going to add another mouse sensor if the left button is clicked, and I'm going to actually enable tap here, so you can't just hold it down. You have to click once in order to enable this. Then what we want to do is toggle that password text field text entry Boolean variable. So here's the thing. If I want to enable or disable text entry, I have to toggle this text entry Boolean variable. And in order for one object to communicate with another object, they have to send messages to each other. So what I'm going to do here is actually, when your mouse is over this white box with this sensor right here, and you have the left mouse button clicked at the same time, which is this logic brick right here, we want to shout out a message to the text object, the text entry object, to enable text entry. By default, I want it to be turned off, so I'm going to turn off that little variable right there. And what I'll do is when I click on this white box, I'm going to have it shout a message to the text entry field, the text object, to enable that. So when you have your mouse over this white box and you left click, I'm going to have this object send a message using a message actuator, and the subject is going to be text enable, or I'm going to say actually pass enable. Sure, pass enable. And I want both of these things to have to be true, so I'm going to drag one of them to connect it, and I'm going to connect up the second sensor to the AND. So now both of these things have to be true in order to send this pass enable. And so now what I want to have happen is if this text object hears that message with the subject pass enable, so I'm going to add a sensor. It's going to be a message sensor, and the subject is going to be pass enable. I want to toggle this text entry Boolean property. So I'm going to add a actuator. It's going to be a property actuator. I want to assign to this text entry variable. So we're going to check or select text entry, and I want the value to be true. And I believe you just type in lowercase. I'm not really sure if that matters, but let's go ahead and connect those up. Let's make this a bit narrower so you can see what's going on here all at the same time. Great. So if the text object hears pass enable as a message, it's going to enable text entry. But by default, if you see over here, it's not enabled. That's not checked by default. So if I press P to play my game, if I type on my keyboard, I'm not going to see any text. But if I click on the white box and I type now, I can type in. And yes, there's no limit to the amount of characters. I'm not sure how to do that. Let's go ahead and make a enter button over here. So I'm going to move things over just by panning my camera over because I still have lock camera to view enabled. I'm going to make a button, so I'm going to actually click right there to put my 3D cursor right there. I'll press Shift A. I'm going to add a mesh plane. Let's scale it on the Y, SY on your keyboard. Let's press S and then X to make that a bit bigger. And maybe the whole thing a bit bigger. I'm going to press Shift A again. We're going to add a text object. And actually I'm going to break out of my camera so I can move this up. In fact, if I look at this, things are too high up there, so I'm going to move it. Actually, that one's just very low down. That's all that's happening there. Great. If you go into wireframe mode with the Z key on your keyboard, you should be able to go from your front view or side view and see the wireframe of where things are. This just says text right now, so I'll press Tab to go into edit mode. I'll press backspace a few times and type enter, and I'll go back into object mode. I'll press Z to go back into solid view. And I want it to be in Comic Sans, of course, so I'll go to my font tab. I'll change the font over here to Comic Sans bold, and let's give it some materials. I'll press Alt-C to convert the text object to a mesh right there. And let's go ahead and give it some materials. I'll make it have material. It will be green, and it will be shadeless. And this object will have a material. It will be red, and it will be shadeless as well. So let's go ahead and look through our camera. That's what it looks like. I can move my enter over. I'm going to actually join these things together. Okay, so now that they're in the right position, I'm going to select both the text and I'll hold Shift and select the box right behind it, and I'll press Control J to make them part of the same object. So now they're just one object. And I want to make this into a button too. So again, it needs two sensors. It needs a mouse. So I'll add a mouse left button sensor, and I'll need a mouse mouse over sensor. And when I click on that button, I'm going to shout a message to the text object to compare its text property to a predefined string. So all this button is going to be doing is shouting a message. So I'm going to add an actuator. It's going to be a message actuator, and it's going to shout the message check pass. Okay, you can make it anything you want, but that's what I will do. I'm not going to specify a to object. You can if you want, but you might find that you want to make everything work before you start specifying what messages are to what objects. I'll just leave it like that. Let's go ahead and connect these up. I'll connect the top two, and then I'll connect this one to the and. So we have a left button and a mouse over connected to the same and. That looks pretty good to me. Now the text object itself needs to hear that check pass and know what to do when it hears that check pass message. So I'm going to add a new sensor. I'll make this a little bit taller so you can see everything at the same time. This new sensor is going to be a message sensor, and it's going to look for check pass that we just made. And when it hears check pass, and if what the user typed in is the same as our predefined password, which we're going to make right now, then we're actually going to switch scenes to a different level or screen in our game. Now, in order to check to a predefined value, I'm going to add a property sensor. So I'm going to add another sensor here. It's going to be a property sensor. I'll make this taller so you can see what's going on here. The property sensor is going to check to see if the text property of this text object, so we're going to look at the property called text, is equal to a value of, and this is where you get to set your predefined password. Mine's going to be coconut. That's going to be my password, coconut. So we want to check to see if this text object hears this check pass message, and if the text property is equal to coconut right at that instant that it hears the check pass message, we're going to switch scenes. So I'm going to add an actuator to switch scenes. So add actuator and scene and set scene, not set camera, but set scene. And I'm going to connect these up. Again, both of these two things, the check pass message and the text being equal to coconut, have to be true. So I'll connect these both up to that and we should be good to go, except I have to make a new scene. So if you need to pause the video and catch up with these logic bricks, you can do that now. But I'm going to go ahead and make that new scene, that coconut level scene. So right now my current scene is just called scene. I'm going to call it menu. I'm going to click this little plus to make a new scene. I'm just going to make a whole new scene with no objects in it. And of course a scene needs a camera, so I'll press Shift A on my keyboard, and that'll bring up the add menu. Of course, we're going to make a camera. It's rotated by default, so I'll press Alt R and Alt G to reset its rotation and location. I'm going to move it straight up. I'm going to make this camera into an orthographic camera under the camera tab. That's a two-dimensional camera. And I'm just going to add some text. So I'll press Shift A. I'll add a text object. And I'll make this text say, I'll press Tab and backspace. I'm going to say, welcome to the coconut level. Aha, okay. Let's go ahead and make that have a Comic Sans font. So with it selected under the font tab, we'll change the font right here to Comic Sans. Let's press 0 to go through our camera, and I'll press G to move that text. And it's just static text, so I'm going to actually convert this to a mesh. I'll press Alt C and select Mesh from Curve Metasurf Text. Perfect. Let's give it a material. I'll go to Materials tab, press New. Let's give it a orangey kind of a color, and I'll make it shadeless. Perfection. We have a welcome to the coconut level screen. I'm going to call it C. That's going to be the name of this scene. So the last thing to do here is to make that actually jump, or the text entry jump to the scene if the password is correct, if they typed in coconut. So I'll go back to menu, and we have that check. If they click on enter, it's going to shout pass or check pass to the text object, and if it hears check pass and if the text is equal to coconut, we're going to set scene to C. That's the last thing we have to do. Let's go ahead and see if this all works. I'll go ahead and press P with my mouse in this window, and it'll play the game. Of course, if I type in right now, it's not going to do anything until I actually click in there. And now I can type in, is the password pineapple? Let's go ahead and check. I'll click on enter. Nothing happens. Of course, if you're savvy enough with Logic Bricks, you can probably actually have a HUD come up and say, wrong password. We're not going to do that in this video, but of course, you can experiment to figure out how to do that. I'll press backspace a few times, and I'll type in coconut. That's not spelt right. Coconut. And I'll press enter, and it's taken us to the welcome to the coconut level screen. That's great. There's one last thing I might want to do though. If I press escape, I want to let them know that they should actually click here to type in their password. So I'm actually going to add a new text object here. I added it over there, but I'll just press G to put it right here. I'm gonna actually change this text to click here to type, and I might as well make some things capitalized. Of course, we'll make this Comic Sans, and I'll make that a bit bigger. I'm going to convert this object to a mesh, but we're actually going to have this object disappear. This prompting text will disappear as soon as they actually click on the white box. So I'll press Alt-C to convert this new text object to a mesh, and I'll give it a material. I'll just make it a very light gray, and of course it'll be shadeless. So I'm going to press P right now. That's what it'll look like, maybe even lighter than that. That looks pretty good to me. Now what I want to have happen is if it hears the message, what do you actually hear? When you click on the white box, it shouts this pass enable message, which is actually to every object. So I can actually have this text object listen for that. What is it called? Pass enable. So I'm going to have it listen for a message called pass enable, and that is actually triggering the toggle to enable them to actually type at the same time. But when this object here is pass enable, it's just going to end itself. It's going to disappear. So I'm going to go to edit object, that's the actuator, and it's not going to add a new object, it's going to end itself. That's all that option will do. So I'm going to connect this up. So when this object here is pass enable, when the white box is clicked on, it's going to end itself. Let's go and see how that looks. I'll press P on my keyboard to play my game. I'll click somewhere. In fact, I think I probably need to make that a ghost. If it's too big and they actually click on it, Aha, okay, so I actually paused the video there and I discovered how to solve this problem. Right now, if the user actually clicks on the darker text, if I click right there, it's not actually going to allow them to type in, and it's going to be confusing for the player. So how you can solve this, and by the way, if I click somewhere in the white, it will work, but it was not working when you click on the text. How to solve this problem is, it's very simple. With a text object selected, I'm going to go over to the physics tab, and right now this object is a static physics type. I'm going to change it to no collision, and that actually has an effect on the mouse over, as I found, so you can't actually mouse over when there's no collision. So now if I press P to play my game, I can click directly in the middle of the dark gray section and it'll still disappear. I can type in coconut, if I can type coconut, and I can click on enter and it'll take me to the coconut level. That will be it for this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/borencg. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next one. Bye bye.